Well, friends, uh, as you can see on the on the program, if at all you have it in your hands, because the copies we distributed very early yesterday. I'm going to talk about uh, ancient Greek and ancient Indian theater. That has been my lifetime preoccupation, and it has made me study Greece and made me study ancient India as backdrop to theater and as civilizations connected to each other. Professor Arora made part of the things that I wanted to say very easy for me to say, or rather, I need not even repeat them. He concluded, and I agree with him entirely, that if you look upon the whole range of history, and even if you leave out history, because history I never consider as very reliable. If you look upon the texts, all the texts that have come down to us, because the texts are there, literary texts, historical texts, philosophical texts, and if you look upon them, then one tends to agree that there was what he called a Oriental belt. That is, let us say, if we look at history which can be archaeologically verified or which is available to us and textually available to us, then let us say from 2000 BC till almost the advent of Christianity, what you see is a great continuity of ideas from India to Crete. And this is brought out by several texts. Now here, the problem that arises is the problem of European nationalism. I'm calling it European nationalism, not because of the modern European Union, but nationalism of various European societies and the problem of Renaissance. As he explained, that Europe, Renaissance Europe, appropriated Greece, made Greek civilization into their ancestors, and of course, very constructively made a new civilization. And then that was the colonial story. Now, when you look upon this thing in the context of theater, and I'm going to be now very specific in my talk in the area of theater. I am not going to take up all the general things because they have been touched already this morning. Then you find the same attitude. You see, there's somebody talking there. ये ज़रा आप बातचीत बंद कर दीजिए प्लीज़, आप वहाँ रूम में बातचीत मत कीजिए, डिस्टर्बेंस हो रहा है. If you look upon what is called ancient Indian theater and ancient Greek theater, and when you study it, then the same problem arises. You see, I went to college, a modern Indian college, in which you had the usual discourse, the colonial discourse, and I was taught that Greek theater, 5th century BC, the apex of theater, influenced rest of the world, and from there theatrical innovation and spread of the techniques started. So, Indian texts of theater are something which are heavily influenced by theater, but more by Greek theater. But more than that, the very definition of what is theater, just the very idea of what is theater, was the Aristotelian idea. And that was taught as theatre in India. A distinctive feature of when we write something theatrical, then what do we do? This was the whole thing that I grew up with. And when I started teaching also in the university, even after my education at University of Toronto, I came back with the same ideas. That theatre is essentially, the 6 aspects that Aristotle defines: mythos, ethos, etc., dialogue, character, etc. And I started teaching that also. After a while, because I started learning music and yoga and Natya Shastra and other classical texts, I discovered that what I was told about theatre, including Greek theatre, was not the truth. Theatre is not plot, beginning, middle, and end only, and everything doesn't hang around that. And when Aristotle said that there is opsis in it and melopeia in it, that is music and spectacle, then in European theatre there is no music and there is no spectacle. If you take a Shakespearean play, and if you cut out the songs, if at all there are songs in that play, well, every Shakespearean play there is one small song or the other, either by the clown, usually by the clown or something. If you just leave it, it makes very little difference. To the literary people, it may do, you left out few significant lines. But to the audience, to the performance, to the producer, it doesn't. So, European theatre, which claimed itself as the inheritor of Greek theatre, only took a few things from ancient Greek theatre. As all of you know, ancient Greek theatre had very little dialogue. Most of it was song and dance. The very kind of ancient theatre they made, it had a huge area for dancing. The dancing floor, the orchestra, which was called in Greek orchestra. So it was actually the dancing floor. And there was a small slab like this, where the 3 or 4 or 5 actors stood, called the logion. And also, when they spoke the dialogue, they never spoke the dialogue as they have been speaking the dialogue in Europe or in now various parts of the world in a conversational manner. In ancient Greek theatre, even the actors were either half singing the dialogue or they were enunciating the dialogue. You see? It was never conversational rendering of dialogue. Ancient Greek theatre simply did not have that. Now, when I read through all these things, and I read through the ancient Indian text, the Natya Shastra particularly, my understanding of Greek theatre entirely changed. I mean, that version of what was Greek theatre or what was Indian theatre came to an end, because I realized that this was entirely a European perception of what is theatre. To repeat and to simplify, Europeans revived their theatre from 15th century onwards. Let's say in England, Christopher Marlowe is the first significant playwright, writes 1592 or something like that, through a study of poetics. Now, you see, in Europe, there was a very skeletal tradition of theatre, what we call morality plays. Even in Greece, theatre had come to an end. You see, after 2nd century, there is hardly any significant theatre. And the reason was that Christianity could not tolerate theater. And the Christian fathers say that, well, theater, what is this? You know, yesterday we were talking in Professor Pavlos' paper, and he said that the Greek word for the actor is ethiopios, one who, constructs, makes your ethos, your morality. And then there is the word hypocrites. And in English, the word means something else, a deceiver, hypocrite. Hypocrite means somebody who cheats you. Now, where does this come from? This comes from the writing of Christian fathers, Jerome and Augustine, who came much later, but that this movement had begun, that an actor is a deceiver because he has taken up a form which God has not given him. God has given, let's say, it's given me this shape, this face. He given me this face, this is my natural face, and this Greek actor puts on another face on his face, on his natural physical prosopon, he puts another prosopon or a mask, and he is a deceiver. So he changes into something else. Now, who does this? It's the devil. The devil became the serpent, he deceived Eve, and of course Eve persuaded Adam, and therefore the fall. So all these actors are doing what the devil did, and therefore theater is bad. So the Christians first injected some kind of the Christian myth into theater, and they appropriated a lot of passages from Euripides and other Aeschylus and others, and made some kinds of Christian tragedies which were like morality plays, and then finally theater was put to an end. In short, the practical tradition and art of theater came to an end in Greece. So there was no living tradition of theater in Greece in any significant sense. Yes, there was another tradition of performance. Now, that's a big question. What is performance and what are its principles? But theater as a tradition, as a part of polis, and as part of a sacred activity, part of the worship of Dionysos, it all came to an end. It is revived in Europe in 16th century. Now, by reading Aristotle, it is possible to revive certain ideas of, let us say, what is a story, a plot, mythos. How should it begin? How should it have a middle? And how should it end? But you cannot create a practical art. You cannot recreate anything which existed 2,000 years ago as a living art. In no country you can do that, see. There is no example of anything under the sun. Well, there is one, the Vedic tradition, but that has been preserved as a very special effort and is dying out. So you cannot recreate an art. So when you recreate an art, you recreate it from the things that you have with you now, things that have survived today. There is no way of recreating it if it has got wiped out. So the Europeans started creating, and what they were able to do was to develop a logocentric theater, a theater based on speech, based on dialogue. A little bit of gesture, a little bit of no dance. Dance, of course, was separated in Europe into ballet or into another art form. You see, theater was denuded of dance, and the tradition of naturalism developed, and then this tradition, through colonial agencies, spread all over the world, and it came to India. And when it came to India, then it started in urban India. India that was in some way or the other part of the British governance, and therefore we had the modern European theatre in India. But then this is essentially the tradition of the European theatre and the theorists of European theatre. Now, theorists of European theatre, when they look back, whether they look back on ancient Greek theatre or they look back on ancient Indian theatre, they see their own theatre and they try to think and define of theatre as European theatre. And they are not able to see what was ancient Greek theatre or what was ancient Indian theatre. So, there was no dance. The significance of dance, the significance of ritual, the significance of religion, all this was not part of the study of European authors when they studied ancient Greek theatre. And even the construction. You see, today, if you go and see a performance, let us say, of any Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, for instance, it takes about 1.5 hours. In 1.5 hours, the performance is over, whether it is done in London or in Delhi or in New York. Why? Because you are only speaking out the dialogue. And you are even speaking out the choral hymns, the strophe, the antistrophe, and the epodi, which were sung as dance in ancient Greek theatre. They were not spoken out. They were all the chorus. So when you read the play, it's written chorus. But when you go to see the performance, the chorus is spoken out, or at least 3 people speak. But that is not chorus. If I just speak, I can't dance. And if I want to speak and dance, then the whole art format has to be different. And it was different. So when I noticed all these things, then I came to one single conclusion. That Greek theatre is not Western theatre. Greek theatre is Indo-European theatre. Because all the principles of how a theatrical performance is to be done is absolutely common to the ancient Greek tradition and to the Indian tradition. Textually, you can study it in Aristotle's Peripatiki, around his work about poetics. You can study it in the Natya Shastra. Lexically, you can, in terms of principles, you can study it. If you want to know what was the actual performance, then you have to go to sources other than just the dramaturgical texts. Then you have to go to various other sources, stories about how the Greek plays were performed, what was done before, what was done after, how was the preparation done. And I have written very extensively about this in my book, Dramatic Concepts, Greek and Indian, which was published long time back. But because I had very exhaustively written all I had to say, and I never discovered anything else later on, so that book is still there and it's in circulation, and you can read it and see those things. Mainly, Greek theatre and ancient Indian theatre, they were a fusion of the spoken, the sung, and the danced word. And the medium of expression was also through various kinds of codified gestures. The Greeks also had the mudras. And Lida is going to talk about that a lot, so I'm not going to touch upon that matter. It was very specific. Chironomia. It was all there, you see, as a art cultivated. In other words, you do not communicate through dialogue, through story only. You communicate the dialogue, the story, along with dance with gesture. And this happens and happened both in India and in Greece. Now, another 5 minutes before I conclude. In order for this to happen, there has to be a perception of the world. You see, it is not just a theatrical choice. It's not just a matter of technology of theater or audience. It's a matter of how you look upon this world. What is your metaphysical approach to this cosmos? How do you look on the cosmos, and where are you located in the cosmos? And there again we find a great commonality. You see, if you ever visit Greek theaters, actually, amphitheater, you will find one very essential element. When you're sitting inside any theatron, there, you will see a massive backdrop of nature. And every amphitheater has been constructed in a way, there are many other things apart from that when the audience is seeing a play, a performance, visually that performance is only 1/10 of the 9/10 of the sky and the mountain or the sea that may be behind it. I photographed about 35 Greek theaters in Greece and Italy, and every one of them gives you this experience. What does this mean? That what we are enacting, the story of a family or the story of a mythical hero or us, we are a very small part of the great universe. They make you feel that when you're sitting in that amphitheater. That is why amphitheater is that particular design. And you can't get the same feeling when you are seeing Sophocles not Sophocles, Aeschylus or a playwright in a modern theater. Because a modern theater does not have a backdrop. So physically they were able to show you what they wanted to communicate, metaphysically, and through the story of theater. What about Indian theater? Indian theater was not that spectacular. How did they bring in the universe? How did they give you the feeling that we are a part of the universe? That was through constant use of gestures, symbols, and images that brought the great world, the cosmos, the Brahmanda, the big scope, the big egg, into your awareness through words and through gestures. Now, there are many other things. For lack of time, I can't pursue that. Both ancient Greek theater and ancient Indian theater, they were part of a religious ritual. Greek theater was entirely a religious ritual. It was never done as secular. It was done as part of the festival in Athens, the famous history where, as part of the festival of Dionysos, the god Dionysus. It was never done as it is done now as a summer festival. It was done in February when it was cold. Right now, it's not very pleasant in Athens at this moment. And if I ask Pavlos if he's ready to see a play by a great tragedian sitting up there at Theatre of Dionysus or somewhere, I don't think he'd like it. And it may rain, and it used to rain. But that was the time. So all the Greeks, all the Athens would sit there in February, sometimes under the rain, and watch the whole day because there was no single play. Greek theatre has been a victim of too many myths which are based on absolute fabrication by European writers. I'll just mention one more and conclude. The word tragedy. Common language, tragedy means unhappy ending. In Hindi also, now we have started using the word tragedy. Badi tragedy ho gayi saab. Which means, mar gaya bichara. And an unhappy ending play. Now what? How does this start? The Greeks had the Greek tragedy, or tragadoi. It was not unhappy ending. This is a shock to you, because even the Greeks would not like to believe it. But the fact is that Greek tragedy was a trilogy. The first part of it was unhappy ending. The second was going towards a reconciliation. And the third was an entire reconciliation. And they never acted one play. It had to be a trilogy. And at the end, there was a little humor by a satiricon. So it was a tetralogia, 4 things. And it was done from sometime early afternoon till late afternoon. So the total impact was not of an unhappy ending story. It's the Europeans who did this mischief. They just took the first part. You see, the only surviving tragedy out of famous 94 Greek plays is Orestes. The story is like this, that Orestes, the young boy, when he grows up, he comes back and he avenges the murder of his father by his mother. So he kills his mother. Now, to kill your mother was the greatest crime in India and in Greece. So if you did this, you became impure. You could not stay anywhere in a city, you were kicked out, and then the Furies, the Erinyes, they would chase you. And they kept on chasing. This is the second part. And the third part is that a temple is made for them and there is reconciliation. That was Greek tragedy. I have written about this in detail, and I have read papers on this in many departments of Greek in Berkeley and many places in the last 25 years, and in so many conferences, including in Greece. I have asked great scholars that if I am wrong, please correct me. I have had no answer. Because the ancient Greek tragedy, recently somebody from England, a professor of Greek theatre, wrote to me called Seaford that, yes, we should have corrected ourselves, but we have not. That's it. Because the Europeans wrote a Hamlet, or they wrote Romeo and Juliet, or they wrote Tamburlaine. So, the whole world must write a tragedy that way, and it has been doing it for 400 years now. And therefore, tragedy, which in Greek means the song of the goat, Ajagit, tragedy, tragos and odi, song and goat. So the goat song, it was part of the ritual of Dionysus when certain dances were made. That was called the goat song. Then the goat song developed into a huge paraphernalia of a performance which became theatre. So the name continued, but it was not unhappy ending. The conclusion. The conclusion is simple. One has to go back deeply into a very investigative study of ancient texts, ancient evidence, archaeology, and various other methods that we can have of knowing. But not just a study for the purpose of historical discovery as to what really happened. Did the Indians learn from Greeks, or the Greeks learn from it? Obviously, if there was a great connection between the two nations, then two cultures, then they were learning from each other. I mean, there's nothing to dispute about that. But for the modern time, one has to develop a clear sense of what were the fundamental concepts. What did they think when they performed a play? Not just how they performed, but what was the metaphysical message? Where do they place man? What do they think of the destiny of man? Is there a commonality? There is some commonality, in many ways it is very different. And what are the ideas which prevailed in the minds of the playwrights, the performers, and those who created theater in the both world in ancient times, and how, in order to benefit from that, we have to get rid of various problems that we have created for ourselves.